Full force in Portland.
Military deployment.
War-ravaged Portland.
Antifa designated as domestic terrorists.
Okay, if that barrage of high-impact terminology sounds designed to grab your attention.
Well, yeah, that's because the sources we're looking at today are all centered on this moment of, immediate high-stakes political escalation.
Exactly. We are plunging right into President Trump's decision to deploy military troops to Portland, Oregon.
A move that was authorized, interestingly, on a Saturday.
Via a post on Truth Social, no less.
Yeah.
And it instantly just spiked tensions between the federal government and local officials there.
Right. So our mission today, for you listening, is really to cut through some of that noise. We need to analyze the specific directives, the arguments you find in the source material.
It's a real study in polarized viewpoints, isn't it?
It really is. We'll look at the executive authorization, the federal thinking behind labeling Antifa a terrorist group just days before the deployment. And then really contrast that sharply with the immediate and quite powerful counterstatements from Portland officials on the ground.
Yeah, this feels like a scenario where the two sides didn't just disagree on, policy points.
No, it seems they fundamentally disagreed on the actual reality of the situation in Portland.
So we're going to walk you through how the federal government legally justified using, quote, full force.
And why the local government immediately saw that deployment as, well, nothing more than a political provocation.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Maybe starting with the specifics of that deployment order itself.
Sounds good. So the order was, as you said, authorized via social media, directed to the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth.
Right.
But what's interesting is the formal process sort of behind the scenes. This action apparently came after a request from the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem.
Ah, okay. So it wasn't just an impulsive post, there was coordination.
It indicates a deliberate effort through federal channels before the public announcement, yeah.
And when you look at the language, the actual words used in that directive,
yeah,
it's anything but subtle.
Definitely not subtle. He didn't just authorize troops in general.
No, he directed Hegseth to provide all necessary troops, specifically to protect, and here's that phrase, war-ravaged Portland.
Mm-hmm. And any IC facilities, that's immigration and customs enforcement, that might be, quote, under siege from attack by Antifa and other domestic terrorists.
That description, war-ravaged Portland.
Yeah.
Wow. That is incredibly charged language.
It is. It really frames the intervention not as just, helping out the local police.
Right.
But as a necessary military action, like in a crisis zone.
And critically, he didn't just send troops, did he? There was that extra phrase.
Exactly. He added that key phrase that provides the legal backing, really, for potentially extreme action. I am also authorizing full force if necessary.
Full force if necessary. That one phrase seems to transform the whole mission, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
From support to something else.
Absolutely. It shifts it from just establishing a presence, protecting federal buildings maybe, to an open-ended mandate for engagement, for escalation.
If they perceived federal interests were threatened.
Precisely. And the source material does put this action into a slightly broader context for the administration at the time.
Oh, how so?
Well, this Portland deployment apparently followed earlier discussions, maybe plans, about potentially using federal troops to crack down on crime in other cities. Chicago and Memphis were mentioned.
Okay, so maybe part of a pattern or a strategy.
It suggests perhaps a consistent federal approach, or at least thinking, about asserting authority in cities facing civil unrest.
Right. That explains the action, the deployment itself. But it still feels like the real justification, the sort of legal lever they needed to use full force against what they called domestic terrorists, that had to come before the troops actually moved in, right? That aggressive authorization needed something formal behind it.
You're absolutely right. If you connect the dots in the sources, the authorization for that level of force on Saturday, it was actually preceded by a huge legal move earlier that same week, on the Monday. That's when the president signed an executive order formally designating Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization.
Ah, okay, so the designation came first.
Yes, paving the way for the later action.
So if the government formally labels a group a domestic terrorist organization, what does that actually mean? What's the administrative consequence? How does it change what they can legally do?
Well, what's fascinating here, legally speaking, is how it expands their toolkit, you could say. It gives the U.S. government a really broad mandate to investigate the movement's operations.
Investigate how.
Specifically, it enables probes into instances where a member is alleged to have, quote, provided material support to the organization.
Material support. That sounds serious.
It is. This isn't just political rhetoric. It opens up potentially serious legal liabilities for individuals involved. It shifts their actions into the realm of federal terror statutes.
And I imagine the White House's official definition of Antifa, in that order, the language they used, probably matched that kind of extreme legal consequence.
Precisely. The White House justified the designation by defining Antifa as, and this is a direct quote from the order, a militarist, anarchist enterprise that explicitly calls for the overthrow of the United States government, law enforcement authorities, and our system of laws.
Wow. Okay, so that's the foundation they're building on.
That's the claim, yes, that this is a fundamental fight for the structure of government itself.
Did the White House claim this was just like a loose collection of activists, or did they paint it as more organized?
The formal order went further. It alleged coordination. It claimed individuals associated with Antifa further coordinate with other organizations and entities for the purpose of spreading, fomenting, and advancing political violence and suppressing lawful political speech.
Okay, so putting it all together, the federal justification for that Saturday deployment was basically fully constructed by that.
Exactly. They were countering, in their view, a defined, organized, anti-government terrorist threat.
Which, again, in their view, required full force.
That was the federal narrative.
Okay, so that sets the stage pretty clearly for the federal approach.
Yeah.
But now, if we shift gears, the local response in Portland.
Ah, yes. Immediate, unified, and completely contradictory to that federal picture.
They weren't buying the war-ravaged description, I take it?
Not at all. And they definitely didn't think federal troops were needed. In fact, the local leadership seemed to see the deployment itself as the main threat.
How did that play out? Who spoke out first?
Well, the opposition from Oregon's congressional delegation started almost instantly. Senator Ron Wyden, for example.
What did he say?
He stated publicly that there were credible reports, his word, that federal agents may be replaying the 2020 playbook.
The 2020 playbook. What does that mean in this context?
He suggested the goal was explicit, provoking conflict and violence in Portland, essentially stirring things up.
Okay, hold on. If a senior senator is accusing the federal government of coming in specifically to provoke violence,
Yeah.
that's a huge charge. What was the advice then from local leaders to their own citizens? What were they supposed to do?
Their main priority seemed to be de-escalation and warning people. Senator Wyden urged Oregonians, in really strong terms, not to fall into Trump's attempt to incite violence.
So don't take the bait, basically.
Exactly. The local leadership's immediate focus wasn't on confronting the federal agents head-on, but on managing the local population, trying to avoid giving that federal deployment the justification it might need to use that full force authority.
And Portland's mayor, Keith Wilson, his response really highlights that massive gap between the federal view of Portland's needs and what the city actually felt it needed.
Oh, absolutely. He wasn't denying Portland needed help. Not at all.
But he was saying the federal government completely missed the mark on what kind of help was needed.
Yes, that contrast he drew is really powerful. Mayor Wilson actually listed what he had asked the federal government for.
Which
things like federal help to renew our infrastructure and build affordable housing, to help clean our rivers and plant trees, and imagine the future of high-speed transportation. You know, city stuff.
Basic urban development, environmental help, transit upgrades. Pretty standard requests for federal partnership.
Right. Things cities actually need. And then he pointed out what they received instead.
Instead of infrastructure and housing.
His quote is probably the most memorable line in all the source material we looked at. Instead of help, they're sending armored vehicles and masked men.
Wow. Housing versus armored vehicles. That really nails the difference in perspective, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And the mayor didn't pull any punches. He gave the definitive local rejection. He said, if the federal government didn't come to lend us a hand, then take a hike.
Take a hike. Pretty blunt.
Very blunt.
And it wasn't just the mayor and the senator, right? The city's official communication channels were involved too.
Yes, the city's official X handle, their Twitter account, was actively telling residents not to engage. It called the increased presence of federal agents a bait.
Again, that word bait. Don't react.
This unified local message is really significant, coming from the senator, the mayor, right down to the city's social media.
They condemned violence locally?
Yes, they made clear they had no tolerance for anyone in Portland who uses this difficult moment to hurt people or damage our home, but crucially.
They actively opposed the increase in federal forces.
Exactly. They saw the deployment itself as fundamentally counterproductive to keeping the peace.
Okay, so let's try to synthesize this. What does it all mean when you put the federal designation, the full force order, side by side with this vehement local rejection? We basically have two completely different versions of reality running at the same time.
We really do. You've got the federal viewpoint, which is, importantly, legally empowered by that executive order signed on Monday.
Right, the terrorist designation.
From their perspective, this is a necessary deployment. They're combating domestic terror in what they call a war-ravaged area, and they're protecting federal property using the authorized level of full force. That's their justification.
And then the local viewpoint is essentially the mirror image of that.
But completely.
Yeah.
They see it as unwanted, destabilizing, an escalation tactic, a political provocation even.
One that actively makes the situation worse, they argue, while ignoring the genuine pressing needs of the city.
And what's really fascinating legally is how that designation of Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization, that Monday order, fundamentally changes the legal landscape for the feds.
How so?
It essentially provides the license, the justification for using something like full force by elevating the perceived threat level to domestic terror.
So legally speaking.
Legally, that designation means the federal government's action to protect its interests, as it defines them, is justified, regardless of what the local government thinks or wants.
So the local opposition, however strong, becomes legally almost irrelevant to the federal justification for deploying.
From the federal perspective, yes. Their legal basis stems from the terror designation and the perceived threat to federal property and order, not from local consent.
Okay, that clarifies the core tension here. We've covered the key actors, Secretary Noem requesting it, Secretary Hegseth directed to carry it out, Senator Wyden warning against it, Mayor Wilson telling them to take a hike.
All centered around this deployment authorized for full force against a group newly defined formally as domestic terrorists.
Right.
And that tension, that fundamental disconnect, is maybe where we should leave you, the listener, to ponder the implications.
Because you have the president authorizing full force if necessary.
While at the exact same time, local officials are pleading with their own citizens not to react, not to fall into Trump's attempt to incite violence.
That dynamic itself.
Yeah.
Maximum federal power assertion, meaning maximum local calls for de-escalation.
It highlights the dilemma baked into these sources, doesn't it? And maybe it raises a crucial question for you to think about. When federal forces arrive with an authorization for full force in a city whose leaders are actively trying to discourage a local response, how much is the initial definition of the threat already predetermined by the level of force the federal government has decided it wants to use?